In 1206, a man who had been kidnapped, enslaved, and betrayed by nearly everyone he ever trusted united the warring nomadic tribes of the Mongolian steppe and forged them into the most devastating military force the world had ever seen. Within just 2 generations, his descendants would rule an empire stretching from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf. 24 million square kilometers, 100 million people. The largest contiguous land empire in all of human history. This is the story of how the Mongols did it, and why the world never saw them coming. To understand the Mongol Empire, you first need to understand the world they came from. The Mongolian steppe is one of the harshest environments on Earth. Endless grasslands swept by freezing winds in winter, where temperatures plunge to -40 degrees, and baked by relentless sun in summer. The people who lived here were nomads, constantly moving with their herds of horses, sheep, and goats. There were no cities, no farms, no permanent buildings. Life was a daily negotiation with nature, and only the toughest survived. A single harsh winter, known as a dzud, could wipe out entire herds and starve whole communities. This was not a place that tolerated weakness. This environment produced extraordinary people. Mongol children learned to ride horses before they could walk. By age 3, they were strapped to the saddle. By age 5, they carried small bows. Every man was a warrior, every woman capable of managing an entire household on the move. They could survive on dried meat and fermented mare's milk called arag for weeks. They could ride for days without rest, sleeping in the saddle. Their portable felt tents, called jur, could be assembled and disassembled in under an hour, allowing entire communities to relocate at a moment's notice. These were not soft people. But for centuries, these incredible warriors accomplished very little beyond raiding each other. The steppe was divided into dozens of rival tribes and clans, constantly feuding, stealing each other's horses and women, locked in an endless cycle of revenge. The Merkits, Naimans, Tatars, Karaites, and dozens of smaller groups spent more energy fighting each other than they ever directed outward. No one could unite them. Until a boy named Temujin changed everything. Temujin's early life reads like a survival thriller. His father was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was just 9 years old. His family was abandoned by their clan, left to starve on the open steppe. As a teenager, he killed his own half-brother in a dispute over a fish, an act that haunted him, but also revealed his ruthless determination. He was captured and enslaved by enemies. He escaped by smashing a guard with his wooden collar in the darkness. His wife Borte was kidnapped by the Merkits. He fought to get her back, forming his first real military alliance to do so. Every setback made him harder, smarter, and more determined. What set Temujin apart was not just his toughness, but his revolutionary ideas about leadership. Traditional steppe society was built on bloodlines. Your birth determined your rank. Temujin threw that system away. He promoted men based on loyalty and ability, not noble birth. A shepherd's son who fought bravely could rise higher than a khan's son who showed cowardice. His most trusted general, Subutai, came from a family of blacksmiths, yet he would become one of the greatest military commanders in all of history, winning battles on 2 continents. This was radical, and it attracted followers from every tribe. People who had no future under the old system suddenly had everything to gain. By 1206, Temujin had defeated or absorbed every rival tribe on the steppe. At a great gathering called a Kurultai, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, which roughly translates to universal ruler. He was around 40 years old, and he was just getting started. Now here is where the military genius comes in. Genghis Khan did not just assemble a big army. He built a war machine unlike anything the world had seen. Let me break down what made the Mongol military so devastatingly effective. First, organization. Genghis Khan restructured the entire Mongol army using a decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, called an arban, zuan, mingan, and tumen. Crucially, he deliberately mixed members of different tribes together in these units. This broke down old tribal loyalties and created a unified army loyal only to him. He also established the Yasa, a strict legal code that governed everything from military discipline to how disputes were settled. Desertion meant death. Failing to help a fellow soldier in battle meant death. This was brilliant social engineering disguised as military reform. Second, mobility. Every Mongol soldier rode on horseback, and each warrior maintained a string of 3 to 5 horses. When one horse tired, the rider simply switched to a fresh mount without stopping. This meant Mongol armies could cover 70 to 100 miles per day. Their enemies, with heavy infantry and slow supply wagons, managed maybe 15. To put this in perspective, European armies of the same era could take weeks to cover distances the Mongols crossed in days. The Mongols moved so fast that they routinely arrived at cities before the news of their approach did. Third, the composite bow. The Mongol bow was a technological marvel made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew glued together and cured over a process that took up to 2 years. It could be fired accurately from horseback at a full gallop. It had a range of over 300 meters and could punch through armor. Every warrior carried 2 bows and 60 arrows, with different arrowhead types for different targets, broad flatheads for cutting through light armor, and narrow piercing tips for heavy plate. Now multiply that by 100,000 riders. The Mongols could deliver a storm of arrows that darkened the sky, all without ever engaging in close combat. Fourth, psychological warfare. The Mongols understood terror as a weapon better than anyone. Before attacking a city, they would send merchants and spies ahead with stories of Mongol brutality. Cities that surrendered peacefully were spared and often prospered under Mongol rule, their merchants protected and their taxes lower than before. Cities that resisted were utterly destroyed, their populations massacred, and a few survivors deliberately released to spread the news. Word traveled fast. After the first few cities were demolished, many simply opened their gates without a fight. Fear conquered more territory than swords ever could. Fifth, adaptability. This is perhaps the most underrated aspect of Mongol warfare. The steppe nomads had no tradition of siege warfare. They had never needed to attack walled cities. So when they encountered the massive fortifications of China and the Islamic world, they simply learned. They recruited Chinese and Persian engineers, adopted siege weapons like trebuchets and battering rams, and became expert siege warriors within a few years. They even diverted rivers to flood cities and used burning naphtha launched from catapults. They absorbed the best technology and tactics from every civilization they conquered and turned it against the next opponent. The conquests began with northern China. In 1211, Genghis Khan invaded the Jin dynasty with roughly 100,000 warriors against a civilization of 50 million people. It should have been impossible. But the Mongols used their speed and tactics to devastating effect, bypassing fortified cities, destroying armies in the field, cutting supply lines, and starving defenders into submission. By 1215, Beijing had fallen. The Jin dynasty's own defectors taught the Mongols how to use gunpowder weapons, adding yet another tool to their arsenal. But Genghis Khan was not finished. In 1219 he turned west. The Khwarezmian Empire, covering modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, had made the fatal mistake of executing Mongol trade ambassadors. Genghis Khan sent a final diplomatic message asking for justice. When it was refused, he took it personally. He invaded with approximately 150,000 soldiers and systematically destroyed one of the most powerful empires in the Islamic world. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv were leveled. At Merv alone, contemporary sources claim over 1 million people were killed, though modern historians debate the exact figures. The irrigation systems that had sustained Central Asian civilization for centuries were demolished. Some regions would not recover for hundreds of years. Genghis Khan died in 1227, but the empire continued expanding under his sons and grandsons. This is a crucial point that many people miss. The Mongol Empire was not just about one man. Genghis Khan created a system that outlasted him. His son, Ogedei, conquered the rest of northern China and launched the invasion of Europe. His grandson, Batu, led armies into Russia, Poland, and Hungary, destroying every force sent against them. At the Battle of Legnica in 1241, the Mongols defeated a combined force of Polish and German knights, displaying the severed heads of the fallen on poles. Just 2 days later, and hundreds of miles south, at the Battle of Mohi, the Mongols annihilated the Hungarian army, using the same tactics that had worked on the steppe. Europe was saved only because Ogedei died and the Mongol generals had to return home to elect a new Khan. It is one of the great what-ifs of history. Another grandson, Hulagu, destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate in 1258, sacking Baghdad and killing the last caliph. Baghdad, which had been one of the greatest cities in the world for 500 years and home to the legendary House of Wisdom, was so thoroughly devastated that the Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from the destroyed libraries and red with blood. Meanwhile, Kublai Khan, yet another grandson, completed the conquest of all of China and established the Yuan dynasty, becoming emperor of the most populous nation on earth. At its peak around 1280, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. It encompassed China, Korea, Central Asia, Persia, Russia, and parts of the Middle East. Nothing before or since has matched its territorial extent as a single contiguous empire. But the Mongols were not just destroyers. This is where the story gets more nuanced and more interesting. Once the conquest settled down, the Mongol Empire created something remarkable, a period historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. For roughly a century, you could travel from Europe to China in relative safety along trade routes protected by Mongol law. The Silk Road, which had been fragmented and dangerous for centuries, became a superhighway of commerce and ideas. The Mongols established a postal relay system called the Yam, with stations every 20 to 30 miles across the entire empire. Riders carrying a special tablet of authority called a paisa could demand fresh horses at any station. Messages and goods could travel thousands of miles in days rather than months. They introduced paper money across vast territories. They practiced religious tolerance, allowing Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others to worship freely, even holding debates between scholars of different faiths at the Mongol court. They brought Chinese gunpowder technology west and European astronomical knowledge east. The exchange of ideas, technology, and culture during this period was unprecedented. Marco Polo traveled the Mongol roads to China and returned with stories that Europeans thought were fantasy. Persian astronomers worked in Chinese observatories. Italian merchants established trading posts on the Black Sea. Arab doctors shared medical knowledge with Chinese physicians. The world became connected in ways it had never been before and would not be again for centuries. So why did it end? The Mongol Empire began fragmenting almost as soon as it reached its maximum size. The very thing that made the Mongols great, their steppe nomadic culture, made it difficult to govern settled civilizations. You cannot run a bureaucracy from horseback. The empire split into 4 main khanates, each increasingly independent. The Golden Horde ruled Russia, the Chagatai Khanate controlled Central Asia, the Ilkhanate governed Persia, and the Yuan dynasty ruled China. Over time, each khanate adopted the culture of the people it ruled. The Mongol rulers of Persia became Muslim. The rulers of China became Chinese. They stopped being Mongol in everything but name. Internal conflicts between the khanates weakened them further. The Black Death, which traveled along the very trade routes the Mongols had built, devastated populations across the empire. By the mid-1300s, the Yuan dynasty was overthrown in China by the Ming Rebellion, and the other khanates were crumbling. The last significant Mongol remnant, the Golden Horde, would linger for another century before fading into history. Looking back, What the Mongols achieved is almost incomprehensible. A population of roughly 1 million steppe nomads conquered and ruled civilizations totaling over 100 million people. They did it through military innovation, psychological warfare, organizational genius, and an extraordinary ability to adapt and learn. They connected the medieval world in ways that would not be matched until the age of exploration 2 centuries later. The Mongol Empire forces us to reconsider what we think we know about civilization and power. These were people without cities, without writing for most of their history, without any of the traditional markers that historians associate with greatness. And yet they built the largest empire the world has ever seen. Sometimes the most powerful force in history is not wealth or technology, but will, adaptability, and the refusal to accept that anything is impossible. The next time you look at a map of Asia and see the vast empty spaces of Mongolia, remember that those grasslands once produced warriors who made the entire world tremble. And remember that the greatest conqueror who ever lived started as a frightened boy, abandoned on the steppe, with nothing but his determination to survive. That is perhaps the most remarkable part of this story. Not the empire itself, but the sheer improbability of the man who built it.